All right. Can you guys see the presentation up on the screen? Okay, perfect. So my course, this is like a snippet of it, but it's titled Betrayal Trauma Beyond the Bedroom EMDR Therapy When Shattered Trust Isn't Just Infidelity. A lot of words. So that course is really tailored to kind of like how to weave this work using EMDR as your modality, right? But for the purposes of this, because I wasn't sure who was all going to be EMDR trained, I talk a little bit about some different ways to work with it if you're not EMDR trained. Um, so this is what we'll talk about today. What is it? What's the impact? Some responses that you may see show up, things like clinical presentations, and then some ways to kind of work with your clients to heal from it. So I think I know and have met all of you. I'm Venessa Dela Cruz. I have a private practice in Gilbert. It's called Hope Unscripted Therapy. I'm a certified EMDR clinician and consultant. I facilitate for Precision EMDR Academy, so one of their basic training facilitators. So I help new therapists become EMDR trained, and that's super fun. And the reason why I talk about this is because our family experienced a pretty big betrayal trauma in 2022. And even doing this work for as long as I didn't have the language at the time to really kind of understand. Like I understood what was going on, but right, I didn't have words to kind of express and convey all of the things. And so it was really kind of eye-opening about how little we kind of talk about betrayals and traumas in this sort of way. So we do what we know. So here we go. So what is it, right? Like at its like most commonly known, it's infidelity, right? It's intimate partner betrayals in a relationship. And that's true. Like that's, an example of betrayal trauma, but like most people are going to identify betrayal trauma as that. Like when you see the therapy Facebook groups of searching for a therapist for betrayal trauma experience, it's often in regards to infidelity, right? But it's really this idea that there's a violation of trust that happens that I perceived in a safe relationship. Like I had the perception that this relationship was safe, and then my trust was broken in that, right? Dr. Jennifer Freyd, like in 1994, coined this term. And so we talk about this in the course, but like she really saw betrayal as the antecedent to dissociation, right? Like that's why people dissociate is experiencing a betrayal. When you think about it in childhood, that makes so much sense, right? So really it kind of goes down to that violation of trust that then causes emotional, mental, and physical distress. So here are some examples. This is not an exhaustive list, but these are probably the most common ones that you will see in your practices. Number two, I think if most people were to think about it, would be childhood abuse and neglect, right? Like if I were to ask you what is betrayal trauma, it would be infidelity, and then childhood abuse would probably get the most responses at first. But we see it in institutions. Think about work, school settings, like my kid didn't have her 504 followed as if it was optional. It's not, but they thought it was. And that was a sort of a betrayal to her and kind of meeting her needs, right? Churches people can experience that in faith communities, medical systems. So this isn't, this can be so many things, but like think about stories where patients are assaulted while undergoing a procedure, right? Or their anesthesiologist like falls asleep on the job and could potentially cause harm. So there's lots of ways. Like I work with some medical trauma clients, and the stories that I hear are just wild. We see it in the judicial system. I mean, you can just turn on the news to see how that shows up in lots of spaces right now. But it can look like someone being told, that if they make a certain statement, they'll be offered this certain thing, and then that doesn't happen. And in turn, they end up being, going to jail or something like that themselves. So family betrayal is an interesting one. So this is the one that we experienced that I didn't have the language for necessarily. Like I knew what it was without a title to it or a word for it. And there really is no great word that kind of encapsulates it all. But familial betrayal is a term that an attorney gave me. And so I was like, tell me more. And so it kind of went on this deep dive of understanding like what this looked like and what this meant to a lot of folks. And then I got asked to present at a DNA surprise retreat last fall. And it was like, a what? And so I learned very quickly that this became popular like with COVID. People were taking DNA tests like 23andMe and like Ancestry.com, the kinds of things, right? Like we were all home bored trying to figure out life. But then a lot of people were finding out like their dad isn't actually their dad because that's usually where it shows up is on a paternal side. Or that they had been adopted and no parent was actually their biological parent. And so hence the term DNA surprise. And so all of these folks who come to these retreats have had a DNA surprise where they find out that either one, they were adopted and nobody told them, or two, that their paternal parent is actually not biologically related to them. And then often uncover other family secrets that went along with that. And so imagine being in at any age, but like many of these women were in their 40s, 50s, and 60s, uncovering this huge identity shift. Some had cultural shifts, like so many different things. And it just kind of being chalked up in some ways as to like, yeah, I don't know what to tell you. Some parents don't acknowledge it still. Some get very angry that like you want to do anything about it. And so there's a lot of complex feelings that show up in that community around these experiences. And how could the person who was supposed to protect me also cause me harm, right? So again, that violation of trust in a relationship. The people who are supposed to protect me cause me harm. And sometimes the spaces where I'm supposed to feel safe are also a source of the trauma, like school or work, right? So it gets to be really kind of layered and nuanced. And like, here's the thing, betrayal trauma at its core is like nothing new that we are learning about. We're just learning to see it show up in our offices in a different way. It's been here, it's existed for a really long time. It's just how are we conceptualizing it and how are we working with it and how are we talking to our clients about it? Because my clients don't come in and say like, hey, I've experienced a pretty big betrayal in my family system or in my work life, right? And some will even minimize it, right? As like, oh, that wasn't a big deal. Like that was just my mom. That's who she is or whatever. And it's because we need that attachment. At the core, when we were younger, we needed that person. We needed their safety and consistency of showing up and feeding us and housing us and all of those things. Like we can't be mothered by cows. And that's really sad because sometimes cows do a better job than humans. And you see those videos where there's mama cows like mothering baby sheep and everyone looks so lovely and these baby sheep survive. And that can't happen in the human realm. Right? Although, again, sometimes I think we might be better off. In certain situations is all I'm saying. So we need these caregivers. And so we have to preserve the attachment. And how we do that is minimizing and, sort of making it not be as big of a deal. Because if we have to face that reality, it can be really, really painful. Right? So that's DNA surprises. It was an interesting world to kind of jump into and just see the complexities to it, because it's not just finding out that my biological parent is not. Sometimes it really came with identity shifts, like finding out that you're actually not Mexican, but you're African American. And now I have this whole cultural and racial identity crisis in my 40s. And what does that mean about me? And who does that make me? Right? And so the layers of that can be really tricky. We see it in friendships, in social situations. How about the body, right? Like that's not necessarily a relationship or an attachment to somebody else, but it's a relationship with the self. And then all of a sudden our bodies are not doing what we thought they could do. So we struggled with infertility, my husband and I, and this showed up because the one thing that women are supposed to know how to do is make babies, right? And my body couldn't do that. And so that felt like a really big betrayal. It's like, here's this thing that like I'm supposed to know how to do, or my body's supposed to know how to do, and it's not doing the thing. You'll see this with clients who experience like dementia or Alzheimer's. All of a sudden, their brains don't work the way it used to. Or somebody who's had an injury and no longer can function in their body in the same capacity, right? So maybe they had to have a limb amputated, or they become paralyzed. And now they need all this help and support when they used to just be able to be independent and active. So the body can betray us. And then mental health systems, we can't ignore that because it happens, right? It can happen in like family court systems. Think about CPS and Child Protective Services. I did an internship for them in my grad school program. There's so many things that are wrong with the system, but like parents can really feel betrayed by that system, and they wouldn't be wrong sometimes. We can see it in bigger like political systems, right? Wars and all sorts of things. So betrayal trauma exists in, I won't say all spaces because, you're not supposed to be all binary in that way, but like in a whole lot of life spaces. And with that comes grief, right? So it's like understanding what this looks like and how it can show up in all of these different ways. And then the layers of complexity that come with it and how to work with that. Any specific questions about that before we move? Okay. So this is a fancy slide that I made for the course, but you'll get to see it here. So if you kind of break it down into some other categories, you'll see family of origin, right? So this is where you see a lot of the abuse, neglect, whether it's physical, emotional, kind of stuff happen, betrayal trauma of like the DNA surprises, things like that show up. You have those systems, right? So schools, medical system, the justice system, things like that. You have family of creation. This is where sometimes infertility can show up, or even, I've heard client stories of like one client feels like an in-law's being inappropriate with a spouse or a partner, or, punishing a kid when they don't need to cross that boundary, like lots of ways that can look. And then you have the body, and where these all meet is sort of where betrayal lands, is in that middle, right? What they have in common there is that it's a betrayal, it's a violation of trust. So there are some examples of family of origin and systems is when you're experiencing abuse and the system doesn't do anything about it. You report it and it doesn't go anywhere, or you're not believed, right? Family of origin in the body, where maybe in your family system you were taught how to ignore pain. You were kind of called a hypochondriac, right? It's not that big of a deal. It's growing pains, or you'll grow out of it, not kind of taking it seriously. So then it teaches you how to ignore your own body cues too. Family of creation and systems kind of crossover. So maybe there's a church that like really encourages your parents to stay married when it would be really helpful if they didn't, for everyone involved, right? Like, is that better than what's actually going to happen? And so that can be a way that crosses over. We see it in family origin and family of creation, right? Where there's intergenerational abuse that just keeps getting passed down. It's the way it's been done in our family, right? My family culture, we don't talk about things outside of the family. So guess who's a fun person to be at family events with? The therapist, right? No one talks to me because they know, right? Because we don't talk to anybody about it. I'm actually okay with that, but like, it's really interesting. that it still continues. The body and family of creation. What if we have infertility issues or there's a traumatic birth situation, which then causes a ripple effect? I can't bond with my baby because I'm also recovering. I had a client who delivered her first baby and then had so many different complications from having a C-section that she nearly died. And so for the first 3 months of her baby's life, she really was not present because she was busy trying to live and heal. And so there was a lot of anger and feelings about how this all went. It wasn't supposed to look like this. What do I do now? Right? And then systems in the body, doctors dismissing you. Women are very rarely heard at doctors. We're told it's our age. We're told it's our stress levels. We're told so many different things other than let's help you figure out what's actually going on. Right? And so our pain or our symptoms can be dismissed into a wide variety of different things that then creates this distrust. Again, in ourselves too, not just in a system, but maybe this isn't as big of a deal. And so how many women wait too long to go to the doctor because they aren't being heard, and then something is really, really wrong, right? And that's kind of sucky that they weren't heard in the first place. So this is kind of how they interplay with each other. So I saw this quote, and I don't know who it belongs to, but it's really true. The saddest thing about betrayal trauma is it never comes from your enemies. You know what to expect from them. It's the people you don't expect it to come from, right? So the closer the relationship, the more painful it's going to be. So what's the impact of this? You guys know this because you see it. So all of us deal with trauma. Is everybody EMDR trained here? Okay, so we can talk about EMDR. So right, like we're looking for those images, the body sensations, the sight, sound, smells, all of it. What is the negative belief about the self? Right, so common negative beliefs in betrayal trauma. They're there, they show up in different ways. What are the emotions? All of that good stuff. That's what we're tracking. Here's what's happening in their nervous systems. Again, not an exhaustive list, but some ideas. What happens when they're in that fight mode, right? There's more anger outbursts. There's a lot of defensiveness. Sometimes they go to controlling behaviors because they couldn't control what was happening, so they have to control their world now. And so it's not that they're trying to be assholes, but like they're really just trying to make sense of their world. So when we see it as a defense mechanism to their experiences, it's like, oh, doesn't that make sense? This would happen. And all of a sudden, there's a little bit more compassion in the room for what's going on. In the flight, we are seeing that chronic anxiety, overworking, overfunctioning. I don't know about you, but my clients come in looking perfectly like functional, successful humans. They've got careers, they're doing big things, they're parenting, they are presidents of the PTA or PTO or whatever it's called, right? Like all of the things. But you piss them off and you're out, right? I don't got time for that. It's really a defense. Like, oh, nope, that's too painful. So I'm just going to back out of this. In that freeze, like we have decision fatigue. I can't make a decision. I can't think about another choice. Like, I don't know what I want. I don't know what I need. All of those sorts of things. And we're dissociating, right? We also see a lot of chronic fatigue or exhaustion here, which is often what they're coming in for too. Even though they're highly successful, they're also collapsing at the same time. And then we see, for those of you who specializes in this, that people-pleasing piece, right? Like, I'll make nice with whoever I need to make nice to you so that this can just be okay. We self-betray in order to maintain that relationship or that connection. I can't have you be mad at me. Can't have you leave me, kind of a thing. So these are the ones who have a really hard time with boundaries. Because if I do that, someone's going to be mad at me. What if setting this boundary hurts someone's feelings? Those are the things you're going to hear. I have a client where we talk about boundaries like every single week because it's still so hard at the thought that they can set a boundary and that just be okay. We don't have needs. It's everyone else who has needs. Right? So that's kind of like, again, not an exhaustive list, but a little bit of what you're going to see. I would change this quote a little bit, but it says adaptation is a profound process. Means you figure out how to thrive. I would change that word because I think it's how we figure out how to survive in the world. Right? Having to adapt to betrayal trauma is not a thriving situation. It may help us in the moment, but it really helps us get out of there. So we're still in that survival space a lot of times. So what's going to happen? We're going to see this emotional kind of component to it, right? Like they're going to go between numbness and overwhelm. Like they have a very short window before they go hypo and hyper and hypoarousal, right? There's going to be that fear. I'm too much. I have too many needs. I'm needy. Like I'm unlovable. All of the different sort of shame spirals that happen. We might see rage. We're going to see a lot of grief that they won't know is grief, right? So I say that trauma work is grief work. Some people might disagree with that, but like I have not met a client whose trauma isn't also grief. And so they go kind of hand in hand in my mind. So we're going to see that on top of it. In that cognitive realm, we're going to see a lot of rumination over things, like just replaying it over and over again. Maybe like if I could have done something different, or if I wasn't such a hyper kid, or lots of that kind of stuff happening. They get hyper analytical. These are your clients that when you're processing start to say things like, oh, I think this and I think that, and maybe it was this and maybe it was that. And I'm like, are you in your body or in your brain? Right? Because like I'm hearing lots of thinking words. They'll question whether or not these memories are actually true. The amount of times I have heard, well, I actually don't know if that's how it happened. I could have a vacation home somewhere. Right? Because like they say it so often. They don't trust that this was their experience. And then there's a lot of all or nothing thinking, right? So kind of like, oh, you hurt me and I cut you out kind of a thing. Because it feels safer. Doesn't feel safe to be in conflict with someone and to maybe even try to resolve it. Because there's a threat that this person could leave or hurt me further, right? Relationally, again, not an exhaustive list, but there's always a fear that vulnerability is going to lead to pain. If I open myself up, if I try one more time, if I start dating again, like whatever it is, being vulnerable. I have one client who calls it the ugly V word, right? Because it's going to lead to pain. But what we forget is vulnerability is actually a way to connection. And that's what we really need to heal in a lot of spaces. So it gets really tricky. They over disclose in hopes that you're going to like them. So you have to remember that they're going to test you as the therapist. I had one client who was like, I'm not really sure if you like me. Yeah. And I was like, holy, what am I supposed to say in this moment? Right? Because if I say, yes, I'm colluding with this part, of course I like you. I'm colluding with the adaptation that needs to be validated to be liked and lovable, right? And so what I said was some version of like, listen, I am here and I'm committed to our work together, right? Because I'm not your friend, like boundaries, all of the things, but like I had to be really careful because their system is looking for me to validate that they are likable and lovable. And I can't do that. I need them to do that. And so like that's my go-to is like I'm committed to our work together. Right? So it's not about you being liked, it's about the work that we get to do. You'll see in that self-sufficient, I don't need anybody kind of client, super like hyper independent. If you're like, who are your supports? I don't really need anybody to help. Like I figured it out on my own. So I don't really rely on anybody else. Right. And kind of going back to that, they test the therapist for loyalty. Are you going to reject them? Or clients have asked me, like, are you going to fire me because I've told you all of these things? Am I failing therapy? I'm like, you don't get a grade here. What are we talking about? Right? And why am I going to fire you? Because this is really a lot. Am I like your most difficult client? If I heard it had money for that too, like, right? And I just say, do you know the amount of things I've heard on that couch? It would shock you. So I never answer the question directly because, again, I have to try really hard not to collude with the system, the adaptation, right? But I also have to say something because saying nothing also does not help the system either. So we just got to get really kind of crafty with these clients on how to respond in a careful way. But it can be really tricky. So I have fallen into that trap. Like, of course you're likable. What's not to like? And I'm just like, oh, that's what was happening. What you see in the body. So clients who come in with a lot of unexplained stuff. Headaches, autoimmune flare-ups, body pain, fibromyalgia, like no one knows why it happens in the system, but we know like bodies feel a whole lot of things. Chronic digestion issues. So clients who have either diagnoses like POTS, things like that, like there's a lot happening there that is often interconnected. Feeling very dissociative. So one of my specialties for a long time, but I always still tell people I've retired from this job, is like I used to see DID clients and really I still love them. I just can't have too many of them. So we disconnect from a lot when it feels uncomfortable, right? Anxiety, panic attacks, sleep issues, a lot of body dysmorphia. We saw a lot of this with the DNA surprise group, which is fascinating from like a therapist perspective, was how that interplayed with how they then saw themselves. So like when I look in the mirror, I feel like I look different now. I don't see myself in the same way. And so it was really trippy for them to like have to face this new reality, this new information, and that their body still looked the same that it did the day before they found out this news, but also somehow now looks very, very different. And how do you like reconcile that? Right? So that can be a tricky one too. So let's heal. How do we do that? The goals, and this is just me, so you guys take this or leave this however feels good for you in your practice and your clients, but I say it's not about building trust with others, it's about building trust with the self first. No matter what the betrayal trauma was. Because so much of betrayal trauma, one of the sort of, I guess, side effects is that we lose trust in our own self, right? In our own gut, in our own knowing, whatever they would call that. And so that is the work we do first. I do EMDR, so we also do that too, but it's really about helping them learn how they can trust themselves. I tell clients who are married, and listen, I'm not a couples therapist, so like I also tell them this too, but I was like, I don't need you to trust your partner, and you don't need that right now either. You need to trust you first, right? Because if they're too busy trying to figure out how to trust their partner, they're still overriding their own systems. And that's not helpful for anybody. It's not helpful for their relationship. So trust you, then see if trusting your partner comes a little bit easier, right? So that's like one of my biggest goals. And then we grieve because no one likes to remember that trauma comes with grief. So they all try to be like, this is not grieving. Okay. If you don't have this book, I highly recommend it. I have a very love-hate relationship with it. It's called The Wild Edge of Sorrow by Francis Weller. I love it. I love the way that he writes. I hate that he's also right in so many of these pages. So he talks about grief in a different way than like the stages of grief. And I don't really think that when Kubler-Ross did the stages of grief, she meant it as like a checklist we go through, but it can feel like that for clients. Well, like I'm in this stage of grief now, as if we've like go through the buckets, right? And then there's an end date to it, and there isn't. We might grieve differently. I have a friend who talks about how grief like will evolve, but it doesn't just disappear after we hit the last stage of grief. And so I don't use the stage of grief sort of method when I talk about grief with clients. They will, but I will tell them like, we don't go through stages of grief one by one until we're done. Like that's just not how it works. So I use a lot of his work in talking about grief because there's 5 gates of grief, but they're the different ways we grieve. And betrayal trauma hits all 5 gates. Right? So like it's about how we grieve in these different kinds of ways versus like stage 1 or stage 2, how they sort of conceptualize it. Because it's an important process of like moving through some of this pain that they experience, right? And then with that, they can start to kind of cultivate some safe relationships, get to practice these skills in different ways with different people. So that hopefully we can start to use that vulnerability piece again for connection, right? And then we process memories, triggers, things like that using EMDR. So I also do brain spotting and parts work. So this is a little bit how like I integrate them all. Brain spotting I use for my overanalyzers, those who get really, really cognitive and have a really hard time dropping into the body. I can't tell you why, but it just gets them into their body a lot better and faster. We also don't stop and start in brain spotting like we do in EMDR. So once I set up their brain spot and their target, they internally process for however long their system needs to, and I don't stop it. So I think that's helpful for those cognitive people because like when you stop an EMDR and ask them, what do you notice? They go right into the thinking brain. And I don't want them there. So sometimes when we process specific things, I will use brain spotting that way. So it is a more fluid process versus the structure. Parts work I use with everybody. Although I took a training with Kathleen Martin at the beginning of the year, she does a lot of structural dissociation work. And she will say, don't talk to your clients a lot about parts because it colludes with the system, with the separateness of keeping parts separated. And so there's some truth to that with your highly dissociative clients. So you just want to be careful. But I also think parts can help clients have a lot more compassion for themselves when you talk to them in parts language. And so I still do it. I just am careful with my highly dissociative clients. I'll use words like strategies versus parts. So like your brain is using this strategy in this moment. Why do you think that happened? Right? Because then it's not the separateness of, oh, my part did that. It's like my brain is using a strategy it learned to cope with the situation. So like nuanced language, just depending on your clients. EMDR, we all know, kind of goes to the root, all of that. We're working on that memory consolidation, getting that adaptive memory network to grow and light up a little bit more. And the narrative, like, this is a story. This is part of your story, right? Like, how do you want the next chapter to look? Because yes, this happened and it's crappy and you didn't ask for it. But what do you want it to look like next? So some of like that future templatey thing, but like in a bigger way, is what we do with that. They get to reclaim their identity or recreate it or learn about it, right? If they are like having a whole racial and ethnic change, like there's stuff they're going to want to learn more about. And so like, what are they going to hold on to from that experience? And then she did say some really cool things, right? You will grieve and not get over it, but you'll learn to live with it. You will heal and you'll learn to rebuild yourself around the loss you have suffered. You'll be whole again, but not the same. And so that's something too. Like clients want to kind of go back to some before something sometimes. And I use this analogy because I went camping a lot as a kid, is like, once you get a brand new sleeping bag out of the bag, you never put it back the same way. It never fits in the same way. Right? Like you can't go back and make it be something it wasn't or isn't now, but really wasn't then either when you look at it, depending on the situation. Right? So this is a fun one to share with clients too. This one, I don't know what this basic pro and premium situation is, so I'm gonna have to figure out what happened there. But this is a activity that I do with these clients. It's called Letters of Love, and it's adapted from Elizabeth Gilbert, who does this as like a journal prompt, or had started this as a journal prompt for her, is like, what would love want me to know? And it was really kind of asking like her higher self, right? What does love want me to know today or about me? But I will ask my clients, like, what does that part of you need to know, feel, or hear? The part of you that experienced this, friendship fracture, the part of you that is going through the fact that you're realizing your mom betrayed you in this way. What does that part of you need to know? So this can be really good for helping them work through some of that grief, right? And the realization of their experience. So I love this activity. This is an activity that I had them do at the DNA surprise retreat. And there was not a dry eye in the room, because oftentimes we don't give our parts of self those things that we needed then, but we didn't get. And so that's kind of some of the repair work we get to do. Like our parents are not going to, and I tell my clients, like, stop waiting for the person who hurt you to repair the situation, because you actually don't need them. Would it be nice to have that? Sure. But we don't need them to heal, right? We can do this reparative work in lots of different ways. And this just happens to be like a really cool way I have found that's been helpful for people to kind of work through some of those things. I think that's the end of me. We go into a deep dive into this. This is where you can find me, all of the things. But so we go through lots of like case vignettes and things like that, and deep dive through EMDR therapy. But this is like the 45-minute version of what we talk about. So any questions?
Yeah, thank you, Vanessa. Can you tell us a little bit more about the course, how people can get access to that, and the CEUs involved?
Yes, it'll be a 3E CEU course that will come out at the EMDRIA conference, so just in a couple of weeks. So I'll post links on my social media when that comes out. Right now, like the web page is being built for it and all of that jazz. But it's just a 3-hour deep dive into this, where we go through lots of different examples, lots of different negative cognitions that show up here, what to do when the processing gets blocked, right? So some of the cognitive interweaves that you can utilize for betrayal trauma. We go through like the polyvagal nervous system stuff. So it's just a bigger, broader, more in-depth training off of this. I would love to do this in person sometime. I just need to figure out like the logistics of how to host it and all of that jazz, because I think it would be a really fun like in-person workshop to do. I did not have fun like videoing it in my office with no one to talk to or no faces to look at. So eventually I'd like to do it in person as well. But so yeah, in a couple of weeks it'll come out when it's all done. Oh yeah. Thanks for letting me talk about it.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. I think like the interplay between trauma and grief is interesting. I've heard it before that like not all grief is traumatic, but all trauma involves grief. And I
Yeah.
think that that is so true because there is something like that we've lost when we go through, yeah, something traumatic. And sometimes what we're losing is like the fantasy of what we kind of thought things were, but they actually never were. Or in other times we are kind of grieving the loss of something that was that now is totally different. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's
There's
good.
a lot of ways that grief shows up. And again, like clients don't necessarily come in and say I have trauma, right? So they don't know the language is a huge thing we talk about in the course is because like especially in childhood trauma, you don't have the language. Developmentally, you don't have the language. You didn't have it then, right? To make sense of certain things. So when clients say things like, I don't know how to say this, or they really don't, because developmentally at the time, they didn't have the same language to put this together, right? And even like I said, after years of doing this work, like I didn't have the language for the experience we went through. And I was just like, how does this happen? But it does, right? And so, like, language is such a big thing, and how we start to like connect the dots of our experience. And when clients can go, like, oh, so that's what it was, right? Like, and they can you see it start to happen in their heads where they're like putting things together. Then you're like, okay, now we can grab this and run. And it can be more about then offering curiosity and compassion to ourselves, to our experiences, to the things we do as a result, right? But then, like, that in itself is a huge intervention, right? Outside of processing specific targets, like, that's helpful too. But, like, these are things that you're like, okay, we're starting to go down this train track of a whole different way of seeing things. It's kind of magical to see that happen in someone's face, body.
Awesome. Well, any questions coming up for anyone? We covered a lot of ground, Vanessa. I really appreciate like, you know, what we would see it presenting as in the office and how that shows up is always helpful. Um, yeah, so good.
Thank you. Thanks for letting me share.
Yeah, thank you so much. Excited for your course to be coming out. I know it takes a lot of work to put something like that together and so eager for it. So, all right, well, we'll finish a couple minutes early here. We've got some fun presentations coming up. Carly, I think, will be presenting in October, all about people pleasers. We also have someone presenting next month in September about like 4 different types of content that therapists should be posting. And so if you use social media as a way to like market your practice, that one will be especially relevant for that. So yeah. All right. Well, hope you guys have a good rest of your day. Thanks for joining. We'll see you next time.